Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, and my guest has just arrived. So normally we get a couple minutes ahead. He's just arrived, so I'm going to bring him on. And there we go. Here he is.
How you doing, Kevin?
Can't hear you.
Oh, you can't?
So we'll get started here in just a second, everybody. And try again. Errol, can you hear me? Okay. He's going to try something else. And so here's what we're going to
How
do,
about
everybody.
this?
As we normally do, we know that we're doing this live. Eventually, this will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So when you think you've got something where I can hear you, say something.
I think we've got it. No?
We got nothing.
All right. I'm leaving coming back.
As is always the case when we do these live, there's always the chance that something could go afoul, something could go amiss. And hopefully Errol will be back with us. And if not, we'll reschedule. So worry not. But assuming that he gets back and assuming that we can do this as planned, we're glad that you're here. And if you're here with us, I hope that you will go into whatever social platform you're in, say hello, chat in the comments, tell us where you're located, say hello. We'd love to have that. Hopefully we'll get Errol back here momentarily. And while you're here, let's try this again.
All right. What do we think?
Nope.
Okay.
I got nothing. So we can see him, but we can't hear him.
How
And
about
I'm
now?
guessing all of you have had this experience in your life on some sort of Zoom call or some sort of thing. And so we're going to try a little longer. And if not, Errol, I know you can hear me. We'll just reschedule and figure it out. It won't be that big a deal.
Yeah.
So he hears us both. So let me see if there's something on my end. I don't know what it would be. Let me reset some functions on my end. I don't think that will change it, but maybe.
What do we think?
All
right.
I didn't really change anything, but I'm glad that people were saying that he could hear, that they could hear. So thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Marissa. And so I don't really know what went wrong, but here we are.
We're going to have to just go with good old computer audio. So I hope you can hear me fine.
I hear you fine.
That's it.
But if everyone could hear you before, maybe it was fine before. I didn't really change anything on my end. So.
All right. Well, it's good to see you. I'm glad we got that worked out.
It is what it is. So let me say a couple more things to all of you that are here. By the way, thank you so much. They could hear you before, Andrew says. So the issue, if you want to quickly go back, well, maybe we'll be okay. Maybe it was only me that couldn't hear. Well, it's not the first time that I've made a mistake, although I don't know what mistake I made. Anyway, so since you all are here and have put up with our little fits and starts here, while you're here, I want you to imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee. If you were with Errol and I, and you had a question, you would ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. So why wouldn't you do that here? It's just, instead of just saying it, you have to type it. So I hope that you will do those things, because if you do that, we'll have a better conversation. We'll have a better live stream, and eventually we'll have a better podcast. Because yes, this eventually will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If I can get my computer to work for me here. Eventually this will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You can see that up over the corner. It was only me. Yes. Thank you, Marissa. Everyone has now clarified that Kevin was the problem, although I don't know why. All I know is that it was fixed. So listen, everybody, I'm going to do a countdown. We'll start the podcast. We'll start what will be the recording for the podcast here in just a second. In 3, 2, 1. Struggles, obstacles, and challenges. We all face them. Perhaps the question is, do those obstacles serve as stumbling blocks or stepping stones on our path to success? How we process and use our life experience dictates our future path. I think we can safely say that, and yet maybe we don't know how to process that effectively. Today, we're talking with a person who has had a very unique path and brings us a perspective on obstacles and pain and how to process all of it for greater understanding and ultimately for greater personal and leadership success. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live in the future on your favorite social channel as we live stream these recordings, you can get information about those and therefore join us, interact with us sooner, and get this valuable information and insight sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, where you can find out when and where and how. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses, picked from one of 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become a more effective, productive, and confident leader while overcoming some of your toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. Our guest today is Errol Doebler. You see him next to me. Let me introduce him, and then we will dive in. Errol is one of the few people in the world who has served as a Naval Surface Warfare Officer, a Navy SEAL officer, an FBI Special Agent, a SWAT operator, a combat veteran, and a business founder. He is the author of Ice Cold Leader, Leading from the Inside Out. His leadership consulting company, Ice Cold Leader, has taught leaders and individual contributors at every level how to find peace within so they can find the edge they've been searching for. Errol, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Well, it's good to be here, Kevin. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. And sorry for the temporary technical difficulties, but we are on track now. So Errol, I often lead with the question, tell us about your journey. But in your case, that could be the whole show, and it would give away a big part of the book. So we can't really do all that. By the way, everyone, you need to get a copy of this. And even if you only read the first 70 pages, which is about the journey, it'll be worth it. And all I can think, Errol, is your story should be a movie. Someone has to have said that to you before. But I will do this about the journey. Why do you end up, after doing all the things that I described briefly in your introduction, how do you end up doing, or why do you end up choosing to do work around leadership development?
Yeah, it's a long journey to that. I would have, first of all, leadership for as long as I can remember has been part of who I've been. I used to play youth hockey growing up, and I started when I was 4 years old. So by the time I was like 7, I was like a veteran, and so I was, captain of the team. And my dad, one day before a game, he said, well, what are you going to say to the boys, Errol? I was 7. I'm like, what do you mean, what am I going to say to the boys? What are you talking about? And he said, well, you're the captain, you're the leader. They expect to hear from you. And, whatever I said when I went in there, I tried to say something, but it was from that moment where I was like, wow, that this is important, right? If you've got that C on your jersey or you've got that title, people do expect something from you, and how you deliver it. So I always took it seriously. I got medically discharged from the Navy. I got into an accident. I got an injury, which you clearly read in the book. I wanted to stay in the SEAL teams forever. We moved forward, and I was in the private sector for a while in leadership positions there, loved it, and then ended up after 9/11 jumping on with the FBI. And I loved the work of an FBI agent, and that's where I was attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment for combat operations. It was a glorious experience hunting terrorists, but I had a real problem with the culture of the FBI and the general leadership, and to the point where I was having trouble reconciling being a part of it. And, so then you have to make decisions. Okay, well, I have decisions. I can't change anything, right, in an organization like that. And I really didn't have the capacity to change things, even in my immediate surroundings. And I said, you can continue to do the work that you like, and now you have to shut up about what you don't like about the leadership and move on. That's allowed. Okay. Or leave, put your money where your mouth is and leave. And, and so I left. So then I reflected back, before I didn't just leave and go, what am I going to do now? This was all a process up, for me to leave. And, I had an acquaintance, as I was expressing my frustration, and I don't know what I can do, kind of looking at me funny. And I'm like, what are you looking at me like that for? And he said, Errol, I pay a person with not even a quarter of your qualifications. I pay him a boatload of money to talk about leadership. And I literally said, I go, that's a thing? I had no idea this whole vertical existed. I didn't know. I knew there was a guy named Tony Robbins out there, right? And okay. And so I said, all right. And then I just started to put together, right? Wrote it down. What are my philosophies? And can I share it? And where'd they come from? And can I back them up? And I felt like I could. And I wanted to help people. There are people who want to be great leaders. And I wanted to be able to find them and help them because I felt like I had something really significant to offer. And then later, as I got diagnosed with this traumatic brain injury and then how I moved my way through it and survived without even knowing I had the injury, it was still the same leadership process. So that's a nutshell into how I got into what I'm doing now. And it's really, I love leadership. I think it is the foundation for everything. And I think I have stuff to offer people. So that's what I went.
There you go. So we're going to get to those principles that you talk about in the second half of the book in a few minutes. But I would say, I'll say this somewhat humbly, that I've been reading books about leadership for literally my entire life. And I've interviewed both on this podcast and in other ways over 600 people and therefore read in all of those cases their books. I've never read a book with the title Ice Cold Leader until now. And so I really want to go there. The point is everyone tries to figure out a way to differentiate what they're saying and what their message is, and which is fine from a marketing perspective, of course. But usually or often we can figure it out from the title, but I don't think anyone can figure this one out. Ice cold leadership. So tell me why ice cold. I mean, I know, but tell people why that's your moniker. Here's the book again. Why that's the moniker and why that matters for us as leaders.
Yeah, it's so we rebranded. We used to be something else. We used to be called Leader 193, and 193 was the number of my bud's Hell Week class, and it was kind of paying homage to that. And it just meant nothing to anybody. Nobody could remember the name. It just meant nothing to anybody except for me. And as we, as businesses grow, and you say, okay, where are we? How do we get to this next level? That was one of the things, the name. And we were, Ice Cold Leader, it was one of those things where we didn't have to rack our brains. And that made it feel really good, right? It wasn't what's going to catch people's eye, what's going to be different, what's going to differentiate ourselves. We already knew how we were different. And, Ice Cold Leader came up in the very beginning of my journey. And, I had some people advise me saying, don't do that because that sounds very cold, right? It sounds very like you don't care about things. And I just, look, you listen when you listen, you learn. And I just said, I go, Ice Cold Leader. That's it. Because that's who we are. Now, why are we Ice Cold Leader? Well, obviously I do these ice baths, but I do them and I incorporate the principles, both physiological principles and behavioral principles, to my leadership process. And first, the physiological stuff, right? We know scientifically, right? I bring the science to people to help them understand the absolute importance of the cold. And so when we get into cold exposure, if we get into an ice bath, a cold shower, even if we go out for a walk and it's cold and we take our shirt off or whatever, just have a t-shirt, we know one of the many things it does is it resets our nervous system, okay? It relieves the inflammation from our physiology. And the inflammation, we also now know is the root cause to basically every major disease that plagues us as a society today. So when we can do that, when we can reset ourselves, we are no longer thinking about how bad we feel because of the effects of stress and inflammation, right? We're not like, oh God, I feel terrible today, or I just feel all bunched up. No. We can reset ourselves and our mind is clear. And now we can think about the process. Okay. Now the process of moving through stressful situations, solving problems, that can be our focus. That's the first reason why Ice Cold Leader is who we are. The second one is there is no better behavioral tool in the world than a big tub of water with 300 pounds of ice in it. Why? Because some of the things that we present to people are the ability to recognize stress and emotions, how you act on those emotions, and then how are you moving through a stressful situation in a way that you want, which is calm or intentional, right? You might make the wrong decision in a stressful situation. That's fine. We can never always make the right decision. But what we want is to make sure we look back on it and go, no, that was a very conscious decision I made. It just happened to be the wrong one. Cool. You can live with that. Okay. You can live with that. What we have a problem.
We are human after all.
Yeah.
Right?
What we have a problem living with is I just went off half cocked. I felt this way. I acted on it. And now look what I have to clean up. So to get into an ice bath or a cold shower, some exposure, right? That's an induced panic attack. That reminds people what stress feels like. So that's a tool because we're so stressed sometimes we don't even recognize it. You'll recognize that. Okay. And then what I teach people is how to breathe and the science behind the breath and why that works to calm you down. So you can sit in 300 pounds of ice like this. That is a metaphor. That is a tool that everybody can use in every aspect of their life, minute to minute. Forget about day to day, week to week, month to month, literally minute to minute. So that is, again, a nutshell into why we are Ice Cold Leader, because we believe in all the aspects of it. And it's just what I do.
Since none of us are sitting in an ice bath right now, we can imagine that. I suppose if you're listening to this podcast, you could stop. You could get yourself, take a cold shower, then come back and listen to us again. Yeah. But for those of us live in this moment, we can't do that. Right. I'm not dressed for it anyway. So trust me, you don't want to see the camera if I were. So anyway, we'll go past all of that and say that one of the things that you just heard from Errol is this idea of awareness, which to me is a big piece of your 5 elements. If I paraphrase and I summarize what I read in your 5 elements, I want to have you talk very briefly about the 5 elements. And we are talking with Errol Doebler, the author of Ice Cold Leader, Leading from the Inside Out. And I want you to talk about each of the 5 sort of very briefly, and then I'm going to come back and ask you a couple of questions along. Yeah. But just give people the overview of this process that you're helping people through.
It is the process that the brain goes through essentially to solve a problem. Now, the good news for me is I put this process together first and then did all my research, and lo and behold, I was like, hey, this is what the brain does automatically anyway, right? So it always works. But no matter what you're doing, whether you're walking into the break room, for coffee at work and you see a colleague you don't like, or whether you are the CEO of a business and you have to figure out how to merge 2 companies together, or whether you are a parent who is dealing with a child who's going a little sideways. These are all challenges and problems to be solved. And if we recognize the process in which they are solved, we can be very conscious on each element of that and making sure we're moving through it. So what are they, right? The first thing is there's always a trigger. Something is happening. I just described that. There is an emotion. You will have an emotion. And that is the basis for everything. You need to recognize your emotions. Okay? That's the first part. Because your emotions drive your actions. And your actions are essentially what your culture is, right? Culture is made up of the things you do, not the labels you put on them. There's many factors to it. So then we have to have this cultural awareness, right? What do I do generally based on that emotion? It could be I lash out when I'm angry. I retreat. I ignore. I delay. I avoid. Whatever it is, it's something. Then, so we have to be aware of that. Then we're able to make very conscious changes and decisions about our behavior and something I call guidelines for behavior, right? Based on what I've seen about myself or about my team through this introspection and awareness, here are 2 or 3 behaviors I'm going to focus on, okay? That covers that behavioral aspect of it. And then at the end of the day, leaders execute and they solve problems, and they do this by having a plan. There is a planning process. So you have to move through, this thing happened. This is how I feel. This is my intuitive action. What is my desired behavior? Now, what's my plan for getting through this? Okay. That's it. That's what happens every time. And then the final piece is something, I call the resistance, which is used a lot. And that's just basically saying everything I just said is common sense, right? You can't really argue with it. And yet, when we're aware of these elements, we still choose not to do them. Why? Who knows? It's just this unexplained force called the resistance. But if we're aware of it, then we come full circle and we say, I have to still be aware. I am not doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing. I'm aware of it. Now I get to make a choice. I can continue to blow it off. Cool. That's up to you. Or I can go back to work. So that's, once again, I've used in a nutshell a lot. That's the process. Okay. And that is a process that I've used in the most dangerous situations I've come under in combat, in the Navy SEALs, in the FBI, hunting terrorists around the world. It's the process I used to get through my daily life when I was struggling and spiraling from this traumatic brain injury that I didn't even know I had.
I find it interesting, having read the book, or read almost all of it, well more than half, that as you, looking back on it now, as you describe in the front half of the book, when you tell some of the stories that get us to the back half, that even as you're describing them, you're walking through these steps. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's very obvious to me that you were describing the story and walking through these steps that you were going through mentally, which I found really fascinating. There are some pieces here that I want us to talk about a little bit more. And I appreciate this. A lot of times it's hard for authors to kind of tighten it down into really just telling us those 5 things. I hope I
did. You
did a great job. It's fantastic.
I could talk about it all day long.
And I know we could. Like, I absolutely know we could. So, but I want to get at a couple of pieces here. And the first thing I want to highlight for everybody is notice how many times Errol used the word awareness. That it's very difficult for us to lead effectively unless we're aware of how we're showing up, why we're showing up that way, and the impact that we're having. It's interesting, Errol, that your background, one of my co-authors and colleagues was the chief engineer on nuclear submarines in the Navy. And he talks about, when the vessel is in the water, it changes the water. And so he talks about, as a leader, when we're there, we don't realize we're changing the water around us, but we are. And it's that awareness thing that's so very critical. And one of the things that you and I have in common, not from an experience perspective, but from a belief about leadership development perspective, is the importance of reflection. So can you sort of tie together this idea of awareness with reflection a little bit?
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because without awareness, you cannot take advantage of anything. If you are not aware that something exists out there for you to seize upon, that's it. It's a wasted opportunity. So likewise, if you are not aware of all of these elements of this decision-making process, this problem-solving process, you can't make fundamental adjustments or changes without the awareness. You're just moving through, okay, and hoping it all works out. When you're aware, that emotion, this is anger, and I'm aware of this anger, and now I'm also aware of the fact that my intuitive action on the anger is to lash out. And I have to now be aware of the fact that I cannot trust that instinct, and that is not the right behavior here, right? So that awareness, okay, it also allows us to go back and make those targeted changes. The result is something we didn't like. I am aware of the process of decision-making. Where did I go wrong? I never made a plan. We just started doing stuff randomly. That's why that failed. Cool. You can go back and you can make the adjustment. And most importantly, and what truly separates Ice Cold Leader from everybody else out there, besides, the cold exposure and how and the physiological stuff and how we use that from a wellness perspective, it is a true process. Okay. It is not Errol Doebler says leaders do these 3 things. I'll name 3 things that great leaders do. They'll be accurate. The problem, though, is what happens, Kevin, if you already do those things and you're still struggling? So what good am I to you? I'm nowhere. If I put you through a process, you put yourself through a process of always looking at your emotions, always looking at how you act on those things, you begin to now make the targeted changes that are right for you. Without awareness, you cannot do it. And without the reflection piece, you can't go back and make the adjustments. Simple as that.
So there's a subhead in the book on page 163. This is not a book report. I'm not going to ask you to tell me what it is. I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to talk about it because it's so true. And I don't know if I've ever seen it written quite this way. You say, if you are not present, then you are somewhere else.
That's right.
Which is true. And it relates to what you were just saying. So say a little, but before you do that, by the way, Andrea, I saw your question and I'm planning to go there. So hang with us, Andrea, because we're going to get to your question in a sec. If you are not present, then you are somewhere else. Why say that? Why does that matter to us in relationship to what we're just talking about?
One of the examples that I like to give is this thing about multitasking, right? And we've all been in this situation where we walk into the boss and the boss is cranking away on an email or something on the computer, or might even be on a phone call, or have somebody else in the room. And they think that because they're so busy, they can do these things all at the same time. Okay. You can't, because here's the most basic premise. If I'm talking to you and you're hearing me, okay, and I'm saying all the things you want to hear, but you've got your face buried in the computer, maybe what you're not seeing is me talking to you like this with, my head in my hands. Okay. That's the cue that something's wrong and you've missed it because you are not there. You're somewhere else. So you can't see the most important thing in this interaction because you're trying to do many things at once. So you're nowhere and you're certainly not here. And if you're not here, you can't see the most important thing that's happening. Me talking to you with my head in my hands. I may possess the ability to articulate in a way that makes me sound calm, makes you feel good about what's happening. But when you see me rubbing, doing this, logically, if you were there, you're going to go, what's wrong? What's wrong? That you did what? And you've now asked the most important question. What's wrong? You can't ask that question if you're not there.
It's interesting because to me, being present is a present. It's a gift that we can give to someone. In fact, if we give someone our full attention, we're giving them our time. It's the most precious thing we have. We can't manufacture more of that. And when we do that as a leader, to your very example, Errol, I think it's critical to our success as a leader to build the relationship, to build the trust, to build the things that will help us be successful. Andrea asked about it, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit more as well. The third principle is the principle of guidelines for behavior. Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more about what that one means. Mm-hmm. Maybe give us an example or two.
Yeah, I will. So when I talk about things like leading from the inside out, again, I'm very happy with the book, the title, because we didn't have to think. Right. It really was the culmination of all of these years of putting this together and seeing how the process helps people. And so when I bring people through my course, we start with them. Right. Oh, that's very personal. Yeah. Well, I don't know what else to tell you because that's the only way it works. And we talk about our own personal culture, and they will dig out the things that they are successful in spite of, not because of. Right? I multitask and I'm not present. Well, you're successful in spite of that, not because of that. Right? It's easy to say, well, that's what I do and it's a crappy behavior, so I must be because of that. No, it's not. Okay? I really let people have it, in public. Okay, well, guess what? You're successful in spite of that, not because of that. Every now and then, a group butt chewing is warranted, but as a matter of course, no, it's not. So when people look at that, okay, and say, you know what, I can make an adjustment on that. If I adjusted that behavior of making sure I'm present as opposed to multitasking all the time, would I get better? Yes, I would. Therefore, that is now my behavioral guideline. That is a part of my personal culture that I am going to focus on to make me better until it becomes habit. Then I can move on to something else.
So notice what Errol just did, everybody. He looked at, he reflected on, he was aware of his existing scenarios, what the patterns, the habits, if you will, and said, okay, when I find myself in that spot, what am I going to do different? Because I need to pick a different
behavior
response, a different behavior when that situation arises. And then, so figure out what it is, name it, identify it, and then work to create it as the new habit, right?
And then decide what's the behavior that I can focus on that will make me better. And I don't, I give people 3 tops, okay? Because if you're really doing the work, you come up with 10. You don't need 10. You need to find the 1, 2, maybe 3 that if you work those, a lot of other problems are going to go away, right? And that's the key. What was, I think there was,
think about that as everybody has the biggest levers, right? Lots of things you could work on, but if you got these 3 things, to your point, you're going to make huge progress, and it's going to have ripples that you are not currently aware they will have.
And again, from the inside out, what most people I work with realize is, wow, my team has truly taken on my personality. I micromanage, I lash out, I do these things. And now, because then I eventually say, okay, now let's put it to your team, your family. And they're like, they do the same thing. I'm like, thank you. That's the power of leadership. For better or for worse, they are going to follow your lead. You are probably going to have to make the same adjustments you made for yourself for them. Okay, this is how we do business. And the power of that is not, oh, I guess Kevin read this book and we're going to try to do what's in the book now. No. Because if you follow the process, you will tell them, here's what I've observed. And here's why it's hurting us. And here's what it would look like if we turned it around.
Yep.
They will listen because you said, here's what I've observed. And here's the impact. Everybody's going to go, ooh, is he talking about me? Because you are. And that's going to have power. And again, that's the beauty of the process. You will find what you need. Follow the process.
And Andrea is saying, and I think you're just focus on the things you struggle with as the place to start, right?
Well, it's the things you struggle with, but you may not struggle with being a big jerk. That may not be. That might become very.
There's the blind spot piece of
that's
this,
right. So, not necessarily what you struggle with, the things you do that you are successful in spite of, and that is a hard thing to do. But if you put yourself through this emotional awareness and this cultural awareness, and you have to have this, your honesty and courage going through it, right? Then you'll see it, man. And you'll say actually the opposite. That's a problem that comes so easily to me. Well, because it's become a habit. Right. So again, not necessarily what you struggle with. That could be an easy one, but it's generally a little deeper than that.
Yep. So a couple of things I want to ask Errol before we finish, and I'm going to shift gears, admittedly, as we start to wrap up our time together. The question that I have for you is, what do you do for fun?
I don't have a problem having fun. Okay, so I'm a pretty lighthearted guy, but what I do to have fun is obviously different than what I used to do to have fun. What I do to have fun today, and this is going to sound very hokey and cliche, but engaging with my kids on what they're doing is fun for me. Going to their hockey games, listening to them give the summary for their books that they're reading, watching them grow, that is fun to me. So being fully immersed in their life is fun. I like going to see sporting events. I like going to see concerts, right? That's all good. But my fun has become now doing that with my family. Look, I'm active. We love to ski. And you know what? Every now and then I even get onto the mountain by myself, and I enjoy that because it's a good reflective time, but I don't enjoy it nearly as much when I've got either my wife or my 3 kids with me. So that is where I am for fun right now. It's an adjustment. If you asked me this question 10 years ago, I'd say I like to go out to the bar, have a few drinks with the friends, have some laughs, go get a workout in. That's all good fun. Yeah, I can still do those things, but that's not what brings me the true joy in my life.
Love that. So the question, if we had had a chance to chat ahead, which we didn't, which is fine, this would have been the only question I would have told you ahead of time. So here it is. So what are you reading these days, or what's something, Errol, that you've read recently that you might share with everybody?
I can. So it's funny you say that, because I have recently picked back up journaling, and I find it's a very important thing that we do in our family. My wife and I do it. But I used to struggle. I would journal and be like, okay, I don't know what to write today. I would literally journal. I don't know what to write today. And I'm like, it'll come. We've recently picked up 2 books. Gosh, and they're right here. I can give you one, and I just can't remember the name of the other one. But essentially, one of them is The Daily Stoic. Okay. And that is the philosophy of the Stoics. And what I think Ryan Holiday does is every day of the year, he gives a different thought from a Stoic, and then he interprets it. There's another book we're reading, and I'm humiliated, but it's the same concept. It's a thought for the day. And what I do now is, and my wife does it too, first thing when we wake up, we read it, and I just journal my thoughts on that thought. And that's what we're reading. That is truly what I'm reading today. And it's been a lot of fun.
So inside baseball, everybody, that is what I learned about 400 episodes ago, why to ask the person ahead of time, because they know the book, but they can't remember the book. So if you'll do this for me, Errol, if you'll send it to me, we'll make sure we get it in the show notes. So it won't help the people watching us live, but it will definitely help the people who are watching it later. And I'll just say this to everybody, that there are lots of those kinds of books, whether it's the Daily Stoic, whether it's something that has more of a spiritual tone to it. There are a whole bunch of them that you might look to. And it's a great strategy to help you with journaling, which helps you get at this reflection and awareness stuff that you were talking about earlier.
So 100%. And it's also like, sometimes people don't know, right? Going through this process we just described, Errol, I'm struggling with the behaviors. Well, and I would go back to say, well, because you're not looking hard enough at your emotions and what you're doing. That's okay. But you know what? Try one of these behaviors from the Stoic. Try to say from the Stoics, try to focus on the fact that you can only control certain things, and the things you can't control, you've got to let them go. You cannot spend your energy on that. That is a behavior that, if you did that, would probably make you better. Right. So yes, 100%. There's books galore, and I will absolutely send you the other one, because the author deserves the credit.
And we'll get it in the show notes. And so now, Errol, the question you've most wanted me to ask from the very beginning, which is, okay, Kevin, give you the chance to tell us more about you and your work, where we can find the book, etc. Where do you want to point people?
Yeah. icecoldleader.com is everything about us, our courses, our events, and things like that. You can also find me at the Ice Cold Leader on Instagram. That's where we focus a lot on the cold exposure and this practice of yoga that we do as well, which we didn't really touch on, which is fine. And then LinkedIn, it's Errol Doebler on the LinkedIn. Those are my major platforms.
Perfect. icecoldleader.com, everybody. Now, my question that I have for all of you who are listening or watching, whenever that might be, whether it's live or whether it's later, it's the question I ask you every single week. Now what? What action would you take as a result of this? And it might be as simple as, I'm going to go buy Errol's book, which I would highly encourage you to do. But beyond that, what did you take from listening to this conversation that you can go apply? Maybe it's some very specific ideas from the 5 elements. Maybe it's this idea of, what am I successful in spite of ? question. Maybe it's thinking about how I might journal. Maybe it's realizing the need for me to be more reflective so that I can build my awareness of what's going on around me, both inside of me and around me culturally. And then lastly, maybe it is to go take a cold shower, whatever it might be. The real goal here is for you to take action on what you heard, because it's then and only then that you will get the true value that you could have gotten out of the last few minutes that we invested together. So let me close by thanking you, Errol, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. I'm glad that we solved whatever technical issue was going on my end at the beginning, and that we were able to have this conversation. I've looked forward to it, and we had a great time. And let me tell all of you who are listening or watching, the awareness that you need is that if you found this valuable, there are others that will as well. And so point out this podcast to them, invite them to join you, send a link to invite them. You know what to do, whatever platform you happen to be watching or listening on, do that. And then come back next week, because next week we'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.